us on Protection of Women for Domestic Violence Act. But before she comes here, I take it a privilege to introduce her. Madam has pursued her LLM, Hindu Law and Law of Crimes, Mumbai University, from Mumbai University. She has practiced over 20 years in civil and criminal law. Madam is a founder and trustee of NGO Samanvay, which works for women and family laws. Madam is a recipient of Young Professional Achiever Award by Maharashtra Times Group. Madam is a recipient of Best Legal Column Award from Marathi Patrikar Sangh for legal column in Maharashtra Times. Madam have consistently written on law and women's issues since 2004-2005 in all leading newspapers including Maharashtra Times, Lok Satta, Sakar, etc. Madam has worked as legal advisor to the State Commission for Women in honorary capacity. Madam has co-authored international paper on human trafficking for World Congress and designed syllabus for feminist jurisprudence with Dr. Chandimandu. May I request Advocate Zai Meher to come forward and take the mic.
Good morning and thank you everybody. It's a privilege when the Bar Association with which you practice invites one to deliver a lecture. I can see all my colleagues sitting with me, so I take this honor as a representative of all of you because we all have shared, we all have worked together. So I am taking this opportunity to be your representative here and to voice certain concerns which we all have experienced in our practice whenever we have handled the cases under the Domestic Violence Act. But before I begin, let me also appreciate and thank the organizers, that is the FCDA, as well as the Maharashtra Law University, for this auspicious coming together of the professionals and academicians, which is the most required thing. Academics removed from practice and practice removed from academics, both will not work. They have to go hand in hand together, and only then we will have a complete and comprehensive and effective implementation of the laws as we know. Now coming to the Domestic Violence Act. As we all know, law is a constant process. Law evolves with practice. Its interpretation will change with times. And that flowing capacity that the law has is the intrinsic power of law, because as we have seen earlier also, let us see the matrimonial laws for that matter. If we see, they have come into existence since 1955, if we see the Hindu Code Bill. And the way the concept of cruelty that has evolved over the years, from extreme cruelty to inability to stay together without being hurt or without being affected by the other person. That kind of sensitivity which has grown and has crept into the concept of cruelty, that tells us how the law evolves with various legal perceptions and as it is practiced. Now if we see the Domestic Violence Act, it is a comparatively a very new act, one. Secondly, we also need to understand that this is a specially enacted law. Now we all know that this specially enacted law will always precede over the or have the precedence over the general laws. Now what and why is this a specially enacted? What was the objective? What was the reason? And when we look at that, only then we will understand whether we are achieving the objectives with which this law has been passed. Therefore, I have taken the liberty to title this address as Critical Appreciation, where we will be able to see the special enactment which is with the in the line of today's topic, specially meant for the protection of women. Whether in practice we are able to see its effective implementation implementation? And if not, then what needs to be done? Where are we lacking? That is the kind of review which I would want to take along with all of you, because as I said, I can see many colleagues who are practicing with me and who can share their experiences, what have been their inputs from the practice, and we can take all this ahead. If we could compile it into a compendium or help the government to make a policy on this further. Without taking further time, let's go to the law. May I request for the change of slide, please? When we are talking about the law and its implementation, we need to understand with what perspective we are looking at the law. And therefore, the vision that Justice Chandrachud has given to us becomes extremely important. Dr. Chandrachud very clearly says that when we make special laws, they are meant to disturb the hierarchies. They are meant to disturb and create a different kind of a society. And therefore, what is known in our Indian constitution as social engineering. So we need to see this not only as a law which offers protection to women, but a law which intends to create a different social hierarchy, a different social system, a different social way of bringing together men and women in particularly realm of family. Now if we see family, that is the basic unit of society from where the change has to emanate. And therefore, all this becomes extremely important. If we see the preamble, what Justice Chandrachud has said, what is critical that if as a judge you are giving effect to the constitutional values of equality, liberty and fraternity, which exactly what the objective and the statement of objective of the Act also states. Next slide please. So when we are understanding various case laws, when we are trying to understand this law, when we try to interpret its provisions, what we need to see is, so what is it? We all know about the law of interpretation and the mischief rule of interpretation as to where lies the mischief and where we need to correct it. So when we are trying to read the provisions, when we are trying to implement them, that is exactly what we need to be doing. Next slide. We are talking about women and laws, we are talking about gender justice, we are talking about equality. When we are doing that, what we lose sight of is we are talking about that particular section of the society which is almost 48%, that large a section. And we need to do that without dividing this large section into various categories. Caste, creed, religion we do understand, but at the same time we also need to make sure that we do not discriminate or divide this large section of the society into married, unmarried, divorcees or separated women. We have to see woman by herself in the society, which is why the law very clearly says, or the Act very clearly says in its preamble, that women's rights, unless we see them as human rights, we will not be able to bring them at par or bring them or give them the true understanding of gender justice as we call it. Next slide please. So coming to the Act, let us see what the preamble says. Preamble gives us always the key to the Act. If we see the preamble, next slide, has these specific terms in it. More effective protection, guaranteed under the Constitution. So we are talking about the fundamental rights. So every provision that we see has to be seen through the eye of the fundamental rights, Article 14, 15, 16 and so on. Victims of violence of any kind. Here we see that the ambit of definition of cruelty has been increased, and all sort of, including the economic abuse, has been included or has been made part in this act. Now the most important thing that needs us or sets us to think is within the family. We have protection of women from the Sexual Harassment Act at workplace. This is specifically to the family. So these are the two areas where women need protection. So this refers to within the family. Matters connected therewith and incidentally thereto. So we are not talking only about the family and the woman per se, but all the matters which are related thereto have to come in the ambit of this act. Next slide, please. The statement of objectives and reasons, as stated, refers to Article 14, 15 and 21. Then, very strangely, it also speaks about provide remedy under the civil law. All those practicing know very well that if a domestic violence case has to be filed in the magistrate's court, it runs as per the CRPC, although there is a wide discretion to the court, and also it is considered as quasi-civil. However, the statement of objective definitely states civil law, but at the same time, it does not give any substantial rights. So if you need substantial rights, you have to go back to the matrimonial laws, and there is bound to be multiple litigation. So this is actually supposed to be a summary trial to give immediate help and immediate assistance to the aggrieved woman, which is intended to protect the woman from being victims of domestic violence and prevent the occurrence. So here again we will see that it speaks about preventing the occurrence, but it does not speak about what steps have been taken to prevent the occurrence. Yes, there is a protection officer, but if you see the section 5, which states the duties, section 5 and I think section 9, which speaks about the duties of the protection officers and police, it nowhere allows them to reinstate a woman who has been thrown out of the house into the house again. The most they can do is find her another shelter, to take her to another place, but there is no right given to the police to reinstate her in the same shelter, although the provision very clearly speaks about it. So these are various things. If we start from the objectives and the preamble itself, we will find a lot of things which are different from what is expected in the act itself. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, as we were talking about a large section, we were saying that about 48% of women in the society belong 48% of the society it belongs to women, comprises of women. Then in that case, we still can see the statement of objective again speaks about consanguinity, marriage through a relationship in nature of marriage or adoption. So here again, this act is specifically meant only for married women who can take assistance for cruelty under this act against the husband or the relatives of the husband. So while the act begins with a very open mind to include all women in the society, all family relationship, ultimately it does not cater to all the relationships. It caters only to relationships created through marriage. So is it that the other relationships do not require any protection? We have always seen there is abuse between brothers, sisters and so many other relatives in the relationships that are in the family. But the law does not cater. So is it a law which truly encompasses the entire family relationship or the entire domestic violence that might be taking place within the four walls of the house? It does not. So again, the law limits itself to a certain number, certain percentage of women from that large section of 48%. So this is where again we feel very inadequate when a sister comes saying that I am being abused by my brother, or a mother comes saying I am being abused by my son, or such relationships this law does not cover. So that's another inadequacy of this law. Next slide, please. we see the definition of aggrieved person. The definition is not changing. It is woman-centric specifically. What problems or what interpretational issues it has created is who is or has been. It does not speak about was. It does not speak about the past tense or a past perfect tense. It speaks about a continuous tense. So therefore, there have been several judgments which have been talking about whether a person who has left from the domestic relationship, has left the matrimonial home, whether Limitation Act applies to it. That has been a big issue. And there have been several judgments on it. We will come to that. I am also explaining this with the help of the judgments, so that is the only way, because the law, the act is there for everybody to read. But how it is translated, interpreted and expressed in the judgments is what tells us how the law is being executed or implemented and whether it is reaching the last person who requires its help. Next slide please. So here, as I was saying, 48% of the society, which comprises of women, is divided into various categories, and based on these categories we decide whether the domestic violence law can help them or not. Next slide. Everybody is aware of this judgment. This was a very famous judgment, and the case also finally got settled, as it generally should. Here the court very clearly said that we are well aware that we will be excluding many women who might be victims of domestic violence by saying so, but we are constrained to limit the scope of the application of this act. So the relationship in the nature of marriage was further defined. Earlier, when the act or the bill was passed, it was presumed or expected that the law would be applicable even to live-in relationships. But that does not seem so. The court has very clearly clarified which live-in relationships can come under the ambit of this law and which will not. Next slide, please. Oops. I think this will not be seen properly. I am sorry about that slide. The section is there. The section is there in the Act for all of you to read, so I will skip this slide with apology. Next slide, please. So these are the kind of domestic relationships which the statement of objective states, but it does not cater to all the objectives. Next slide. I think there is a little, as I am discussing, I think the slides are a little mixed up, so I am sorry about that. This is about, as we were saying, the woman who is or has been in a domestic relationship. This speaks about the time factor where, notwithstanding the fact that in the past she was living with the husband in the shared household but was no more living with him. So here the court has proactively stated that even if the statement of objectives does not include or the definition does not include, the past relationships can also come into the play. However, there are contradictory judgments about whether the 462, I think, of the CRPC, 468 of CRPC, whether applies to this or not, because the punishment which is given for the breach of the protection order, whether the CRPC would apply to it or not. There are several other judgments, contradictory judgments on it. Next slide. I am again sorry for this. The court has held that the maintenance, non-payment of maintenance and not return of Sridhan should be considered as continuous offences. The judgment is Krishna Bhattacharjee versus Sarthi Chaudhary and another. Krishna Bhattacharya versus Sarthi Chaudhary and another. I know that is the only title of the judgment that you may not be able to see. Next slide. So this is the point that we have come to. This is a Mumbai High Court's judgment of 2013. However, as I said, there is again a debate about this. I am not sure whether this judgment has been set aside or has been overruled by any other judgment. You can enlighten me if there are any. This was a judgment passed by Justice Roshan Darvi, where she had said that after having left the house, 1 year is the maximum period where we come under section 468 of the CRPC, that within that period the case should be filed under DV Act. However, this is subject to the earlier discussion we have had, where there is continuous non-payment of maintenance, continuation of the non-return of Sridhan. It is considered to be a continued offence, and therefore even after lapse of a certain period, a case can be filed thereafter. Next, please. This is a case where the relationship, live-in relationship has been discussed, where what are the conditions of in the nature of marriage. So when we say a relationship in the nature of marriage, the court very categorically states that if the parties decide to get married, they should be able to contract a valid marriage, and despite having all the conditions in their favor to contract a valid marriage, they still do not marry. Only then it would be held to be a relationship in the nature of marriage and not otherwise. So if a married, suppose one married, one divorcee or one unmarried person resides together in a live-in relationship, that relationship will not fall under the term of relationship in the nature of marriage. There has to be a possibility, a choice to them to contract a valid marriage if they wish to, and despite having all the conditions favorable to them, they decide not to get married, then only that would amount to a live-in relationship in the nature of marriage. That is what the court has clarified. Now again we come to the same point as the earlier case of Dimple Khanna and Rajesh Khanna and the other lady that we saw. When such relationships occur and we simply cut them off from the category, then how successful or how effectively we are providing remedy to women as stated in the preamble. The preamble does not speak of any categories of women, but the Act as it proceeds has categorized the women and given assistance or help only to a certain section, certain percentage, which probably is very minuscule. I believe no statistical data will be available for that. Next please. Here the court has categorically refused to give any relief because it said that even if you were in a live-in relationship but you knew that the person was married, despite that it was your choice to live in the relationship. So in a way the court says that you should expect domestic violence and tolerate it as well. You will not get any help. So this is kind of a formal acknowledgement that only legally valid relationships or kind of attaching a value, morality to a relationship which is reinforced. All of us, or those of us who have studied feminism, those of us who have studied about women's rights will definitely may disagree with this. Next slide please. Here the court has differentiated, in this case the court has differentiated between the two acts, the maintenance under section 125 and the reliefs which the person might get under the Domestic Violence Act. It's an interesting judgment, which is why I have referred to this. Next slide. As we all know, by the Supreme Court judgment, the adult male person, that added male has been removed and added male person has been added. But yet, if we talk about, which we will come to the next point, that or the problem of this we will come to next. Added male has been struck off and added person has been replaced. So far it was understood that the case can be filed only by the woman against the man. But by striking this off, it has opened a plethora of litigation by adding the female members as respondent. The female relatives of the husband can be made a party to this litigation as well, which is a big thing, because generally in India a woman gets married into a family, not just to the man. So let us also understand that some of us live in the cities, some of us, a large number, lives in small towns and villages, for whom the picture is entirely different. Next section, next slide please. Then we come to the shared household. So while we were talking about the shared household, we come to the one of the conflicts in law, as I may say, and that conflict in law can be seen as, this is again the section which has been reproduced. Next slide please. The shared household is identified as where the aggrieved person lives or has lived at any stage, either singly or along with the respondent, owned or tenanted, jointly or singly, have or does not have any right, title, interest or equity jointly or singly, belongs to a joint family, irrespective of any right, title and interest of equity. Next slide. So when we identify this as a shared household, or the ingredients to define a shared household, we come to the basic conflict of law, which is right of residence versus right of ownership. As we all know, when a woman gets married, she has a right of residence in the matrimonial home, but she does not have any right of ownership. In the same manner as we do not have a concept of matrimonial property in India. There is no concept of matrimonial property. Lot of people feel that, okay, now that I am taking a divorce, 50% of what he has becomes mine automatically. It does not happen so. In India, the women have only a right to maintenance and right to residence, and nothing beyond that. So the right to maintenance, whether it is the interim maintenance, permanent maintenance, what can be given, what cannot be given, is to be deliberated. And if we see every law that speaks about maintenance, it always speaks about to the extent that she is unable to earn. So it does not take care of the entire life or the needs of the woman, but it expects her to be independent on her own if at all she goes through any litigation. So here, in the very first judgment that was delivered by the Supreme Court under the DV Act, it very specifically clarified the right of residence to be different from the right of ownership. And if the owner decides not to allow a gratuitous tenant or not to allow anybody in that house, then in that case the wife can be ousted, wife or the daughter-in-law, as in this case. We all must have referred to this case, so it is a well-known case. Next slide please. Since the Batra versus Batra, the law has kept on developing, and in various judgments, the judgments, as we know, keep being overturned, new laws come into place, the judgments will keep developing, and with that the law evolves. The next, which very clearly again emphatically pronounced the principle that the proprietary right is of no relevance, and if during the subsistence of the marriage both the parties have resided there, then the right of residence is to be upheld. Next slide. Now here again the law has gone one step ahead. While protecting the right of residence of the woman, it has also ensured that whatever is troubling her in the household, whatever is disturbing her peaceful possession, occupation and use of that matrimonial home can be removed by way of injunction by the Honorable Court's order. So here, a person who is troubling the lady can be injuncted from entering the house. Next. Now this is a, I would say, cliche, or as you would like to call it. When we talk about a family, when we talk about relationships, when we talk about Domestic Violence Act, we can never ignore the conflict of interest between two women who reside in the same house and claim that house to be their matrimonial home, which is the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, for both of whom it is the matrimonial home, or it could be between the two sisters-in-law who are staying in the same house and sharing it as the matrimonial home. Now when there are fights between the two of them, then which way the law is going to go? This judgment speaks specifically that no woman member can be removed from the house. Next slide. This is an improvement on Patra, where the court specifically states that if you want to remove the woman from the house, then you have to make an alternate arrangement. So it is not as though her right is unconditionally secured. Her right of residence is conditional. She cannot claim to want to reside in a particular property, but she definitely has a right to an alternate accommodation. Next slide. This was an interesting case where the daughter-in-law secured. Now the facts of the case are very particularly stated here, because otherwise it would be taken as a blanket case. There was an existing order of protection order in favor of the daughter-in-law, after which the mother-in-law sold off the house which stood in her name with the intention to defeat that protection order, and thereafter the court has ordered that she should be given an alternate residence from the proceeds as well as an adequate compensation to compensate her rights. Next slide. So these are the conflicts of interest which this Act has not been able to alleviate. These are the conflicts of interest which need to be resolved. Now, when we talk about the Domestic Violence Act, as practitioners, we all of us know, in the family court, there is a great influx of the transferred petitions again, which family courts, which restrict themselves only to litigation between the husband and wife, now the domestic violence cases, in order to avoid the multiplicity of proceedings, are also being transferred to the family court to be heard along with the divorce cases, for a simple reason: the Act itself provides for it. In the sense, the Act provides that you can ask for the reliefs under the Act in any pending proceeding, in any matrimonial proceeding which is pending before the family court or in the civil court. So therefore, as the family courts have started receiving an influx of these domestic violence cases, there are several other parties who are not only limited to the husband and wife relationship which are coming into the litigation in the family court. So as we can see, while we are discussing the Domestic Violence Act, we also need to understand, since the Family Court Bar Association is here and is one of the organizers of this lecture series, it is something that we need to consider, that are we really capable, are we really equipped to handle this kind of litigation? What is the necessity? What is necessary to handle this adequately and in a complete exhaustive manner? Secondly, we also will have to think that is going beyond the scope of the family courts and thinking about women, because we are talking about women today. How many courts do women have to go to? How many times? Because this law may give them protection, but it does not give them any substantial rights. And those substantial rights or substantial deciding factors regarding their marital status, regarding the custody, regarding the guardianship of the child. For that, they anyway have to go back to the matrimonial courts. And that creates multiplicity of laws. Though there are multiple laws which are addressing different problems, are they actually helping women, or is it burdening women to go to different courts, file under this act only for this limited purpose, file under that act for that limited purpose? The jurisdiction is different, the territorial jurisdiction is different. That is creating a lot of hassles for women, and we need to think about that also. Whether we can, if we may not be able to bring together the laws, but whether we can bring all the litigation under one roof, if that is possible for us. So here, as I can see, the conflict of interest between the rights of two women in the shared household, conflict of interest in right of residence and right of ownership. The right of residence under DV Act is basic, natural and fundamental right as against the right of ownership. So because the reason why I am raising this issue is the statement of objectives and the preamble itself speaks about fundamental rights. And when we talk about the fundamental right of equality, liberty, then in that case, is this law actually catering to it? Is this law sufficient? And if it is not sufficient, where do we lag? How do we improve it? Next slide, please. So when we were talking about the substantial rights, there was this matter in which the court has said that even under the DV, the custody can be handed over. The custody orders can be granted, although they will have to be again substantiated for the guardianship. But DV Act does provide for the handing over of the custody of the child, which was challenged, and this even I think this matter has gone ahead into Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has also confirmed this. This was an Nagpur bench judgment. Next slide. Can we go back to the other slide here? While we are on this topic, there is one more thing that we need to, that slide or that reference of the case might be here, but we all might be knowing that under the DV Act, the non-custodial parent is entitled to access. So even fathers under the DV Act can seek access and make applications to take access to the children. Next slide. This was a judgment by Justice Pansarkar Joshi, which was again, I think, challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has stated that although both the orders can be passed, only one can be executed. Because earlier Pansarkar Joshi had said that both the orders can be executed simultaneously, which would create a huge burden on the husbands. But Supreme Court has considered that and stated that even if two orders are passed, only one of them can be executed. Next. This specifies, again, as we said, only the matrimonial relationship. In our country, where joint families, where co-parcenary system exists, joint Hindu family system, and joint Hindu family businesses exist, it's extremely difficult to be able to pinpoint the exact income of the husband. So, it becomes all the more difficult to prove your right against husband only when all the amenities are shared by everybody else by taking the benefit of being in a joint family. Next. This was the judgment that I was speaking about, where the access to the father was granted under the DV Act. So it is not as though, although the Act very clearly says that it is a very woman-centric Act and only women can ask for the relief, but this is one relief that a husband or the father can ask for access of the child under the Domestic Violence Act. This is the only exception, I believe. Next slide. So when we are talking about the advocacy, these are the issues which we have discussed during our talk. That these are the issues which we will have where we are advocating the issues or the rights of women. Whether all these issues can be addressed by a single passing of the Domestic Violence Act, or whether we will need help of other acts, or whether a procedural part will help us, where if we can, as I said, if we can have one single court. Earlier the family court was known as women's court. Baयकांचं court म्हणायचे, when the family court was very new and had been just instituted. So is there any such thing that we can use? For a very simple reason. There is something called legal jurisprudence which we all know, which we all study in our cases, which sets out the theory of legal philosophy of law. It sets out how the law should take course. The theories of punishment are there, the theories of trial, the fair trials and so on. The concept of justice has been discussed. There is another branch which is known as feminist jurisprudence. The feminist jurisprudence is a specific branch which specifically talks about women and their status and position in the society. Considering the status and position of women in the patriarchal society, the makeup of the society, the thinking patterns of the society, what actually equality would mean. Here, in the feminist jurisprudence, equality is divided into three parts. One part of equality that says that because the women are weaker section, they need help. The other part says, the second part says that because women have to be treated equally, they have to be treated equally irrespective of whatever their problems or whatever their status in the society. That is like putting an equal and unequal on the equal footing without raising or without adding anything to the unequal part, which does not work. So equality per se does not work, but it will help if we give that protection and bring them at par, and then we talk about two people and then compare about the equals. So these are the kind of issues that the feminist jurisprudence addresses, and unless we take help of the feminist jurisprudence, we will not be able to interpret all the women-centric laws which are meant to help the women to effectively help them to secure their fundamental rights, is my argument. And therefore, it becomes all the more important when we see the judgments of the courts to see which way the law is evolving, whether it is serving the purpose with which the law has been enacted, whether it is serving the, and this cross-check, it is us lawyers or academicians can do, because we can take these orders further, open them for interpretations, we can write about them, we can bring them to the notice of each other, and we are the ones who can work effectively as pressure groups to point it out to the government, to point it out to the legislature that this law, which is specially enacted, being a special enactment, is not serving its purpose, and what is needed to make it more effective. Next slide, please. May I request my colleagues and friends to share their experiences as well? If there are any professors or members of the MLU here, I would earnestly request that along with all the other MA programs that they are starting, it will be great if they also start a program in women's studies and an MA program in feminist jurisprudence, which actually is the basic requirement for all practicing lawyers, because unless we see the other half or how the other half works, how the other half thinks, we will not be able to do any justice, let alone gender justice.
Thank you and good morning, ma'am. Am I audible? Hello?
You have to start it from there, on and off button.
Yes. Thank you and good morning, ma'am. Just one request is there. One help. See, in some cases, no, public prosecutors are very, they are handling very irresponsibly to the females, women. So in that case, so what is the remedy? Is they are not like we are a private advocate practicing, we are dealing and we are caring our clients. the dates and the argument. The case should be handled step by step, and there should not be any arbitrary adjustments and all that adjustments. So in that case, how the public can deal with the public prosecutor? Is there a remedy for that?
One, there is a law, there is practice, there is a procedure that governs the public prosecutors. We cannot go beyond that, but there are obvious remedies where we can ask for permission to be an attending advocate, to assist the public prosecutor. All these things can be done with the help, with the permission of the court. Those applications can be made. Moreover, this is one thing which I have been realizing, and I think we really need to do as advocates, is we need to also train our client in a way to assist us. A lot of times the client does not know what we are doing. Client does not know which way we are heading. The client keeps giving us a barrage of information which she thinks we are not using or we are ignoring. So it is always better to take the client along and make him also aware of how the court proceedings are working. Now, when it comes to public prosecutors, we know it is all they come into play only when it comes to criminal litigation against women. They are representing women. That is the law. But then you can assist, you can help the public prosecutor by giving the documents, helping them. That obviously can be done. Hello? Yes, ma'am.
Keeping a watching advocate.
Watching advocate.
That's a tab.
Yeah.
That is permitted by the court.
Attending advocate,
Yeah.
watching
So
advocate.
many of the.
I will just address.
That is closer than getting the.
See, in criminal matters, basically, the moment the charge sheet is filing, the matter will be go to the public prosecutor. Then a question will come, whenever we are addressing the public prosecutor, madam, you please say. Public prosecutor will tell, yes, I will call you. That never happened. So there is a provision in the CRPC or in the General Clauses Act. You can appoint a watching advocate. The term is watching advocate. They can take a permission from the court. Only thing that without the permission of the court or without the permission of the public prosecutor, you cannot address the court. But one case in Thane, the public prosecutor told me, sir, you address. So then it is permissible. So the benefit is that the complainant is getting an opportunity with the lawyer and he will accuse the public prosecutor. So that is the most lacking part in the criminal law, that after filing the complaint or the petition, it is completely get ignored, maybe it is called out. That is why the question which is put is very relevant. So the some public prosecutors are insisting also, if you got a lawyer or you are accused, you please visit me. So that area it can be. And what madam talked about this woman jurisprudence. That is a very interesting subject as well as a needy thing. Today may not be the members of the MNLU here because there is a function going on the second floor. I will talk to the Vice Chancellor. I am taking the responsibility. I will talk to him, and he is also interested to take new things in the discussion further. Even with our chief guest given a suggestion to give some faculty for the NRI laws also. That also we were discussing there. This point I will discuss with him, madam. So thankful. And one thing is the difficulty in the DV matter. Once upon a time I was handling DV matter. The difficulty in DV matter is that law is in the statute, that law is a complete law. But some technicalities still now statute is not solved. That is the area we can give some enlightenment as well as your results can be worked out. Okay?
Hello.
Ma'am, my query is with regard to interim orders under section 23. Though there is provision, section 23, subsection 2 of section 23, that interim maintenance can be decided ex parte without serving notice to respondent. But nowadays, even though we file the interim application, it takes maybe months and months to decide. Magistrate will send notice, then give them a chance to file reply, kindly enlighten us on how we can proceed with, expediting at least interim application.
The only expediting possible is by taking shorter dates, by ensuring that there is service. There is no other way that to get an ex parte interim order without giving a chance to the other side, because then we are absolutely throwing away the principle of fair play and so, as we all know, though I fully appreciate that this act is actually meant as an immediate relief, but as I already said, that even the protection officer or the police cannot, suppose if I am thrown out of the house, I go to the police station, say I am just thrown out of the house, the police can only take me to the door of the house. In fact, I was addressing one conference of the police officers, which was convened by the Thane Commissionerate, and on this act. And when I said that this is what the act says that she has a right to reside in that house, and when the act defines her right, they very clearly told me, madam, whatever your views, however feministically or legally correct you may be, though the act may say that she has a right, we can only take the woman to the door of the house. If the owner says that I will not take her inside, we have no choice but to make an alternate arrangement in the shelter for her. So these are the situations, and this is not the fault of the police, this is not the fault of the legislature. These are the practical difficulties which we cannot sort out on the ground level. They are problems of the way our society has functioned, the way our society has designed the relationships, and they need to be sorted effectively. So this conflict of interest that we talked about, that can be sorted or that can be resolved only by the court of law, where we all will be helpless. So therefore, the practices of ex parte orders, the practices of without giving notice are, as far as possible, as by lawyers, even we should not insist upon.
Open the door for the higher court.
Further litigation. Thank you.
I understand, ma'am. Further question that, okay, once after serving notice, then respondent keeps making some frivolous applications that protection officers.
When we are on the petitioners or applicant side, we do feel the respondents make frivolous applications. When we are on the respondent side, we feel the petition itself is not maintainable. Why are we going ahead with it? I understand.
This is a provision in every law, and this provision is, I think, rarely used. For example, every act says that.
Which provision, sir?
I'm just giving in detail. Like, for any difficulty in implementing law, the government can make changes in this law. Like, we can remove the difficulties.
Legislature can.
Legislature. So whether we as academician or lawyers or activists, we can do something for application of this.
Yes, as I suggested, it is right in the beginning, that it is a very auspicious gathering of the academicians and practitioners together, which actually needs to go hand in hand. And therefore, as practicing advocates, we can come forward with certain statistics, certain research with the help of the academic institutes like this, and make recommendations on policy decisions. If at least whether the rules or the practices or the procedures, whether they can be changed to the advantage of the litigants is the what we can do. We can be pressure groups for creating, for making changes, for inviting those changes.
Madam, please elaborate. See, you elaborate. So there is two questions coming. One is the constitutional rights, which is superseding all other law. Another
Is that what we asked?
yeah, other is, see, they are telling that an enactment can be happen in the act itself.
No, what he has asked is in what way we can help to make the law implementation more effective. Is that not so? So,
any matter which is without hearing other side, that is a violation of natural justice.
that was earlier question, sir.
Yeah.
And I'm on a different part. Like every act, there is a provision that government can remove the difficulties. So we as accommodation, what you said, no? Whether we can pinpoint the difficulty so that the law can be amended or changed.
Whatever we may do, the law can be amended only by the legislature. The government can at the most make rules. So as I said, at the most some practices can be set. Where we can come into the picture is where we ask for a different interpretation, where we argue for a different interpretation, more feminist interpretation or more feasible interpretation. We can be limited to that, to act as a pressure group, to recommend the policies, to recommend the changes, to help with the study, the data. In fact, if I remember correctly, although the family courts are now almost 30 years old, we still do not have the statistical data. Everybody has done some data collection, statistics limited to their studies, but there is no specific data which is available to people, which is available to the Family Court Bar Association unless we apply under the RTI as to what has been the status, what is it that people have come for, what is it that family courts lack or needs to do. So that kind of study is something which I would expect if we can take up with the help of the students every year.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes.
If two sister-in-laws get involved in the violence, then who will be held liable? The family members or the...
The respective husbands, because it is their liability to keep their wives safe and secure and protect them from the violence. They can file against the husbands of each other and the wife as related through marriage.
But what if it is mother-in-law and daughter-in-law?
We have seen there is a conflict of interest in the relationships in the joint family. We have seen that. Though this law allows, this act specifically allows litigation between members of the joint family provided they are residing under the same roof. So shared household is the basic concept. Living in the shared household is the basic criteria to be under this act.
That is, even the mother-in-law can file a
Against this daughter-in-law now.
daughter-in-law. Another thing I wanted to little bit highlight on the abuse of this law.
One thing, let us not go into the abuse of this law or any other law for that matter which is related to women. I very specifically feel, let us see the situation. What is the situation? Do I have matrimonial rights? I go to a house after getting married. Do I have a guarantee that I will live there forever? There are no guarantees. See, when the situation of women is so totally dependent. Therefore I said, though we consist of 48% of the entire population as women, our rights are divided by our social status. Whether I am married, whether I am a divorcee, whether I am unmarried, whether I am a separated person, that decides to whom I am going to go. The state has not taken my responsibility. We are not a welfare state to that extent. The state does not give me rights that come what may, once you are married in the family, you will live in that family. No, my right is limited to the maintenance and right of residence.
But it is also
Therefore, let us, I am going ahead. So when the rights, my rights themselves are limited, when I have no security or protection of the law to say, which is where all these acts come into play. We have seen 498, which way it goes. Ultimately, be it a man or be it a woman, we as practicing advocates know that the courts are a playground for those who have resources. Very few times you will see an independent woman actually pursuing the litigation without any help or support of a male member of the family. Very few times. So we are not denying that people who probably are undeserved also taking help of this law. But then can we also deny the social context of it? We cannot. So if this is the only window through which I can approach or I can ask for my rights, today all of us know that there is still this prevalent system. We are going to hear the lecture on the Succession Act, that many times whatever expense is given for the maid for the marriage and education of the girl is supposed to be her part in the succession or inheritance. जैसे कि चलो इसका 50 लाख का समझो हक बनता है तो उसमें से 20 लाख उसके एजुकेशन पे खर्चा किया, 30 लाख शादी में दे दिया That's it. Then you don't have any right in the matrimonial family property. So when such things are happening, this is the route we are having. But tell me one law or one provision of law which allows me to recover the expenses of marriage. It is still considered to be an honor. कि नहीं नहीं लड़की वाले हैं तो हम सब खर्चा करेंगे. How can we ask लड़के वाले to make the expense? Very few families say नहीं 50-50 will do. So when these situations are prevalent, these are the loopholes or windows through which women will try to demand their rights. So unless we have a clear distinction or clear provision where women get their rights, and which is going to change the entire fabric of the society, I think most of us know that women are refusing to get married. Women are saying कि चलो बाद में देखते हैं. We need prenuptial agreements. We need such kind of arrangements where we need to tell women that नहीं पहले आप अपने पैरों पे खड़े रहो बाद में बाकी का देखो, because you have no guarantee. There is no protection for you after marriage. Just because you are married into a wealthy family, that's no protection. So we need to use this word abuse very carefully, understanding the social context. I am not denying, rather than abuse, I would rather use the word probably misuse. But even that is questionable in my opinion.
Madam, there is...
Ma'am, thank you for a very enlightening session on TV. Thank you for the thoughts. And more with regard to the controversies and issues that you have raised. However, ma'am, I don't agree with the fact that DV does not cater to non-matrimonial relationships. Because the Act very clearly defines aggrieved woman, which would mean a mother. Domestic relationship brings her in that fold, and also shared household. In my experience as a lawyer, I have catered to many women who do not belong to matrimonial, like the mother, the sister, and they have succeeded to get protection and residence orders under the Domestic Violence Act. So that is one point that I don't totally agree, that it does not cater to non-matrimonial relationship. The second thing was about this whole thing about the police cannot reinstate. I have been working with the police myself, and I have observed that they have no understanding of laws. They have no capacity building, or they have no provision where laws are informed to them. So very often the construct that they have is something that is defined by society. They are not aware of section 17 of the DV Act. They are not aware of section 19. So very often they come up with a lot of notions. However, in practice we have seen that women have reclaimed, like they have asked, do you have an order before you throw me out? Show me the order of the court under section 17. So these issues are there. However, I agree with you that the challenges in implementation continue, and we as lawyers play a very important role in making this law beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. You were saying.
So I was saying about the same thing regarding the misuse of the domestic violence. There is section 6 of the Amendment of the Revenue Succession Act. So it is like that section added regarding the property. So domestic
Provisions
can
in
be
the Act under
like
section 31.
One
I would
second,
like to
she's
ask
asking the
the
question,
third
later on you can ask. And that will be the last question, because since we are short of time, so yours will be the last question. Madam is already asking, so let her continue.
So that is, I feel that way it is misusing, because some
Under section 31.
Wait, Madam is continuing.
One question is, we are finishing with one query, then we will come to you. Just give us 2 minutes.
So section 6 of the Hindu Succession Amendment Act I was talking about, that is giving right in the property of the co-pastor right and all that. So somewhere when we are saying it is a misusing, so it is, I agree with that, it's really sometimes misusing, because sometimes women are going to domestic violence also, as well as property also. So maybe there's something should be there.
I would like to answer this, because the very next session, working session which we are going to continue is on section A6 and 8. In that session you will be very clear with what you are asking, because precisely this very problem will be dealt with the next panel, in the panel discussion. So this query, it will be more relevant if you ask to that panel.
I understand what you are trying to say. See, ultimately, we are talking about inheritance, succession, but again, all that is categorized as per the social status of the woman. It does not. When we are talking about the domestic violence, we are talking about a whole ambit. And again in that, if we keep categorizing, we'll start minimizing or reducing the scope of the act only to the matrimonial relationships. Then it does not work in favor of women per se. That is where the conflicts of interest will keep coming in. And therefore I said whether the solution would be having one court, where we need not go to 2-3 different courts, whether there can be a one window for all the courts, whether there can be joinder of cases. We have the joinder of causes of action, we have the joinder of parties, but we still do not practice that, whether that is possible. Those are the things we need to look into. Yes.
Madam, we will take your last question.
Uh,
Can you switch off the mic?
Question was with regards to the usage of section 31 of the DV Act. Because section 31 clearly says that breach of protection order is technically an offence which is cognizable and non-bailable. So whether in your experience and practice, have you seen the usage of this section 31? Because I have tried it on umpteen number of times and there is no cognizance being taken, let alone it being a non-bailable offence.
Yes.
So when there is a provision, why is it not being used?
It should be used. There is no doubt that it must have been used because the law is there in practice. Unfortunately or fortunately, in my practice, so far, all the orders which I have got have been abided by. So I have never had the opportunity to put this section in practice. But definitely I am sure our colleagues who might have had the experience of this section 31 being applied or used in their practice, they will share their experiences. But it definitely, I do not see any reason why it is not being used.
Yeah, I have handled a case where the husband had to be jailed because he was not paying the maintenance for, though there was an order passed.
So basically when we talk about a cognizable, non-bailable offence, what we are saying is that the police can take him into custody. That is what it would be, right?
But yeah, in this case, only after the court order he was arrested.
Obvious. That goes without saying.
Yeah, police did not take any action.
I hope all the queries are satisfied. You have a query? Okay, we will take that last question.
May I?
Please.
See, you have covered up the whole topic on DV very well. Only one aspect, like regarding we do get good maintenance orders in DV, residence orders in DV, but how do we implement them? How do we execute them? We generally have a hitch over there once the execution part comes in. Thank you.
In family courts, we generally file execution proceedings. ERs are filed where it comes to criminal matters. In the same manner, this proceeding can be filed in the metropolitan courts as well, and there you can take the help of the section 31 that she was talking about. You can apply under that, saying there is a breach of order, and then the court may proceed to take cognizance of that. Right? I take this opportunity to thank everybody, especially the Family Court Bar Association and all my colleagues who are present here. Thank you for allowing me to represent you all and hearing me so patiently, sharing your views and experiences with me. I also thank the Maharashtra Law University for organizing or bringing together the practitioners and academicians, which I think is the most important thing or way forward for us in the litigation. Thank you so much.
Indeed, madam, this plethora of citations shared by you would be of great help for all of us. May I request Vice President, Family Court Bar Association, Advocate Angana Pradhan, to step forward and give away the memento and sapling as a token of love to Advocate Sari Vaidya. Thank you, madam. We will take 15 minutes break so that we can come in. We can proceed on the next working session. May I request all the members to settle down? Guests are coming.